because if we have a look at a very powerful front page from the Northern Territory News, reverse black as we call it in the industry, here it says, Australia's bushfire crisis is devastating. Hundreds of thousands of people are suffering. Now is not the time to play the blame game. Now is the time to discuss climate change. Future generations deserve our leaders to develop a measured plan for the future. What Australia needs now is real, affordable solutions, not armies of keyboard warriors. It's time for our nation to unite. And I've got to say, Ollie, I think Michael made some really prescient points there. You cannot discuss this issue right now without politicising it because, as Michael said, there are a lot of people on the left, particularly some very high-profile Hollywood stars, who are definitely linking this particular instance to climate change. Now, the science suggests that there is climate change, so we need to acknowledge that. But we also need to acknowledge the fact that farmers are blowing up deluxe at the fact that a lot of these environment departments have been hijacked by greenies and they're not actually letting them do the back burning and do the fuel reductions that will ensure that they can protect their homes. What are your thoughts, Ollie?
Yeah, spot on again, Gleeso, and I think that we're all speaking here from the same page because we can all have a sensible and measured conversation, the three of us here on Sky News this evening. The difficulty is, though, when it does boil down to this, this left versus right argument that it is either climate change or it is either the fuel load. As we are all saying here tonight, it is a noble pursuit to take the politics out of it, but that is not going to happen, unfortunately. But it needs to be discussed with both arguments on the table and all counter-arguments on the table as well. And this is a very, once again, noble front page here from the NT News saying, let's be mature about it, let's have a conversation about it. But unfortunately, Gleeso, and thankfully I did have about a month's break over Christmas and New Year and really decided to cut down on the amount of social media, for example, because you couldn't go there. It is just so toxic. We live in a wonderful country here in Australia. We are so fortunate that we can have these discussions and conversations here on Sky News or on 6PR, the radio station I work for, or all of these newspapers that we're going to be discussing tonight. But as soon as you enter the Twitter sphere or Facebook at the moment, it is just toxic. It is absolutely awful, and that doesn't help the debate. You know, you can't point the finger and blame one particular individual or one particular government for his or her or their representatives' policies. Australia has been on fire for thousands and thousands of years, and the way that the country has been able to unite after this crisis and have these conversations is fantastic. But again, it would be wonderful if we could somehow be able to get rid of the hysteria and the hyperventilation, I suppose, that you read about online, particularly from members of the left. But unfortunately, it's going to be all trapped up all together. No one's going to be happy. This is going to continue to play out. And it really requires strong, committed and developed leadership from all of our state leaders, from all of our local council leaders, and of course then from the top at the Prime Minister. And I know that's another story and we won't probably go down that path at the moment, but he's had a very difficult month or so, and he really needed to lead from the top, and we didn't see that. And that's unfortunate because it's exacerbated this hyperventilated situation we're in at the moment, particularly, as I say, with a lot of people making their commentary and their presence known online. It's just been absolutely awful.
Well, let me make a statement. Twitter is not the real world. It's a fantasy land dominated by the left, and fair income, it contributed largely to Bill Shorten's defeat at the last election. Australia's Science Minister wants the debate over climate change to end, declaring the discussion a distraction to the bushfire crisis. The federal government is hoping to win the support of the states for its proposed Royal Commission, suggesting its review now won't seek to scrutinise their operational response.
Australia's bushfire smoke still showing no sign of relenting, and neither is the climate change debate.
You can smell it, you can feel it, you can see it.
But amid Labor's criticism, the government is ignoring the science. Its own science minister says the time for debate is now over.
Every second that we spend discussing whether or not climate change is real is a second that we don't spend talking about and putting in place the strategies to mitigate.
A message perhaps to colleagues considered climate sceptics.
So you're not a climate sceptic, you're a climate denier.
Hey, hang on a minute. Every member of Parliament who comes here has a right to speak their mind. Karen has well set out what the government's policy is.
The government's emissions reduction target remains a 26 to 28% cut by 2030.
The target is set and the target is sensible.
Labor took a 45% target to the federal election and it proved problematic in Queensland's coal country seats.
When can people know, Mr Shorten, the cost of the economy? You didn't answer the question.
Do you know what, John?
Why can't you answer the question, Mr Shorten?
But in an attempt to seize on sentiment surrounding bushfires, Mr Shorten, side by side with his successor, now has a fresh take on the cost of climate change action.
People don't stop me and say, what is the cost of acting on climate change? People now, right across Australia, say, what is the cost of not acting on climate change?
His new leader, though, yet to embrace the 45% target.
Labor has had a strong policy on climate change we've taken to every election. At times, some might argue that we've suffered because of it. But it's the right thing to do.
Mr Morrison, meanwhile, maintaining his proposed bushfire royal commission is also the right thing to do.
I would want to have a level of comfort, and I think all Australians do, that across the country we can have confidence about our level of resilience.
On Sunday, the Prime Minister suggested the state's operational response would be examined.
I think Australians have a very reasonable expectation that any Commission of Inquiry, Royal Commission, would need to cover the full gambit of issues.
But after Victoria and New South Wales trumped the federal government and initiated their own inquiry, Mr Morrison is now suggesting the scope of his review isn't as expansive as first floated.
That's a matter for the states. On the operational, should the truck have gone down this street or the other one, or at what time, and that sort of issue, that's not the basis of it.
Well, I think it's important for each state to undertake their own review. If the national government came to us and said, this is what we want to do, we'd be very open to that.
A sure sign Australians can expect several reviews into the deadly bushfire season. David Shiraz, Sky News, Canberra.